She laughed, sharp, loud, and just cruel enough to make the room turn. I had barely stepped into the gala when her voice sliced through the music, eyes darting toward me in waves. My dress was old, I knew that. A deep navy with delicate lace sleeves, worn soft by time, but pressed carefully that morning. It had belonged to my mother. She wore it to every important moment of her life. Her anniversary, my graduation, the night she held my father's hand for the last time. I wore it hoping to feel close to her. But here, surrounded by champagne flutes and luxury fabric that shimmered like ice, I looked misplaced. "Vintage," the woman mocked, eyebrows arched as she turned to her friends. They snickered behind their manicured hands. My chest tightened. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble floor. But then, before I could lower my eyes, he spoke. Calm, clear, and loud enough to stop even the laughter. "That," the CEO said, his voice carrying across the ballroom, "was my late mother's favorite." Silence dropped like velvet. Heads turned again, this time toward him. He wasn't smiling. His gaze was steady, unreadable as he stepped closer. She wore it when she received her humanitarian award, and when she visited our soul branch, she said it made her feel brave. The woman who mocked me froze. Someone coughed nervously. I stood there, stunned, not knowing whether to run or cry, but something inside me held. My mother's dress didn't shrink that night. It took up space. Real, undeniable space. He didn't stop there. As the room held its breath, he turned slightly toward me, not dramatically, not performative, but like it mattered. "She believed strength had nothing to do with appearance," he continued, his tone softening. "She taught me that people who wear their memories carry more grace than those who chase approval." My hands trembled slightly at my sides. I had never spoken to the CEO beyond brief greetings in elevators, never imagined he'd even remember my name. And now here he was defending me, not just as a colleague, but as someone who mattered. The woman who mocked me lowered her gaze, suddenly very interested in her champagne. Her friends avoided eye contact altogether. Whispers replaced the laughter, but I didn't hear what they said. My heartbeat was too loud, too full of something new, something warm, strange, and terrifying. Visibility. I had come here, thinking I'd blend into the wallpaper, hoping to slip in and out without anyone noticing. But now, with just a few words, he had made me the center of the room, and not for ridicule, but for reverence. He looked at me once more, gently, almost like he recognized something. I didn't smile. I couldn't, but I stood straighter. I looked ahead instead of down. And even though my face was flushed and my legs still shook, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't alone anymore. Not in this room. Not in this moment. Not with him watching like that. Like I wasn't just wearing history, but carrying it with dignity. After his words settled over the room like mist, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations slowly resumed, but with a different energy, one where eyes no longer stared, but glanced and moved on. I could still feel them, of course, but now their weight didn't crush me. If anything, they bounced off. The CEO had already turned away, murmuring something to one of the board members, as if nothing remarkable had happened. But to me, everything had. I stepped aside, unsure of where to stand, afraid that if I moved wrong, the spell would break. A waiter passed with champagne. I declined. I needed clarity more than comfort. Then, unexpectedly, the CEO approached again. No spotlight. No audience, just the two of us near the edge of the ballroom. "Would you like some air?" he asked, not ordering, not coaxing, just asking like we were equals. I hesitated before nodding. As we walked toward the terrace, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in one of the gilded mirrors. Same dress, same girl, but something about her posture had changed. Outside, the night was cool and quiet, the city lights below flickering like distant thoughts. I didn't know what to say, but he did. "Thank you for wearing it," he said simply. "She would have loved that." For a moment I said nothing. Then I whispered. I didn't know it was hers. It was my mother's, too. He looked at me then, not through me, not around me, but into me. And in that stillness, something unspoken passed between us. Not romance. Not yet, but recognition. The breeze on the terrace cooled my skin, but my thoughts raced too fast to feel settled. We stood side by side in silence, the clinking glasses and soft music drifting out behind us. I didn't know what to do with my hands, my eyes, my emotions, all tangled inside me like thread too tightly wound. He was the CEO, the man who ran half the region, who made decisions in polished boardrooms and had his name in business magazines. And I was a junior analyst from a small suburb, wearing my mother's only luxury. What was I doing out here with him? "You don't have to say anything," he said gently, his voice quieter now, more real. "I just didn't like the way they looked at you." That stopped my thoughts, because he hadn't said how I looked. He'd said how they looked at me. There was a difference, one that no one else had ever noticed. I turned to him slowly. His face wasn't cold or formal now. There was something human in it. Tired, maybe, or honest. "I wasn't expecting tonight to be this," I admitted. "Neither was I," he replied, almost with a smile. I looked down at the city lights again, trying not to read too much into the space between us. But I felt it, the quiet recognition, the shared reverence for someone we'd both lost, and maybe the loneliness that came with it. I didn't know where this was going, but something about this silence made me feel safer than any conversation I'd had in months. "I don't usually stay long at these events," he said, leaning lightly against the stone railing. "They feel more like theater than celebration." I nodded, understanding more than I expected. It's hard to belong when everything feels staged. He glanced at me, not surprised, just quietly attentive. "You looked like you belonged," he said, then added quickly, "not because of the dress, because you didn't flinch." I almost laughed. I wanted to. The truth fell out of me before I could filter it, but he didn't recoil or pity me. Instead, he nodded, as if bravery didn't mean hiding fear but surviving it. That moment stretched between us, unexpected and strangely grounding. Then, behind us, the sound of heels clicked onto the terrace. A woman in a red satin gown, flawless and sharp, emerged. She was elegance personified, the kind of woman you imagine beside a CEO in every article and interview. "There you are," she said with a tight smile, her eyes flicking briefly to me. "Your father's waiting inside. The board wants to greet you together." Her words were polite, but the air changed. Thicker, colder. He gave a small nod. "I'll be right there." She looked at me once more, this time longer. Not cruel, but dismissive. Then she disappeared through the glass doors without another word. I stepped back instinctively. Whatever moment we had, it didn't belong here. Not really. Not in this world of suits, legacy, and unspoken rules. "You should go," I whispered. "It's fine." But my chest tightened anyway. I knew what her glance meant. I was a visitor, and visitors never stay long. He didn't move right away. For a second, I thought he might say something, reassure me, reach for my hand, undo the shift in temperature that the woman in red had brought with her. But he only looked at me, not disappointed, not apologetic, just still. "I'll be inside if you need anything," he finally said, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant. Then he turned and disappeared into the gold-lit ballroom, swallowed by crystal and conversation. I stayed on the terrace, alone. The cold found my skin again, but this time I welcomed it. It sobered me, reminded me where I stood. I wasn't angry, not with him, not even with her. But I couldn't deny the truth of what I'd felt in her eyes. This wasn't my world. I had borrowed a moment that wasn't mine. I leaned against the railing and looked out over the city. Thousands of lights, each one a window into a life more complicated than it seemed. Maybe that included him too. I traced the edge of the lace sleeve at my wrist. My mother would have told me to stand tall, to never shrink for the comfort of others. She would have told me not to let a glance undo a truth. And the truth was, tonight I had been seen, not just by him, but by myself. I wasn't a girl in a borrowed world. I was a woman who carried something real. I wasn't ashamed of the dress. I wasn't ashamed of anything. I wasn't leaving the gala early. Not tonight. Not like that. I re-entered the ballroom with slower steps this time. Not hiding, not rushing. Just present. The chandeliers still glittered. The laughter still flowed like champagne. And yet something inside me had shifted. I no longer felt like a ghost at someone else's party. I moved through the crowd, unnoticed for the most part, but with a new kind of calm anchoring my spine. I found a seat near one of the side tables, partially shielded by a column, just enough to observe without being in the spotlight. From there, I watched them. The ones who laughed too loudly, who complimented too easily, who were designer labels like armor. And him. He stood near the center of it all, surrounded by board members and donors, listening with polite interest but always scanning the room, until his eyes met mine. Just for a moment. Not a stare, not a signal, just acknowledgement. And it was enough. I looked away before anyone noticed. But my heart beat differently now. Not faster, steadier. I didn't need his attention. I didn't need anyone's. But the fact that he'd offered it freely still mattered. A waiter passed again, and this time I took a glass. Not to numb myself, but to celebrate something quiet. I had stayed. When I could have run. When I had every reason to. I was still here in my mother's dress, in a room that wasn't built for people like me, and I wasn't shrinking. I was breathing, watching, choosing, and for the first time all night I smiled not for anyone else, but for the woman I was becoming. I didn't notice him approach until his shadow stretched across the linen tablecloth. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, holding two glasses, one for himself. One he placed gently in front of me. I looked up surprised but nodded. He sat without ceremony, without pretense. Just a man in a suit who looked oddly tired despite the polished setting. For a moment we didn't speak. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was full. Full of things not yet said. Of the echo of a shared moment on the terrace. Of the kind of weight you don't always need to explain. "That woman," I said softly, "the one in red, she's important to you?" He exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the glass in his hand. "We've known each other a long time. Our families expect a certain kind of alignment." He didn't say love. He didn't need to. I nodded once, letting the weight of that truth settle. "She didn't like me," I said without bitterness. Just fact. He smiled faintly, almost sadly. Most people don't like reminders that not everything can be polished. I blinked. He was looking at me again, more closely this time. "You didn't flinch," he repeated. "That means something." My throat tightened. I didn't want to be brave. I didn't want to be a symbol. I just wanted to feel enough. "I wore this dress because I miss my mother," I whispered. I didn't think it would become a statement. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the table. "The best things never start as statements," he said. "They start as love." And just like that, the noise of the gala faded again. We stayed like that for a while, two people sitting just outside the center of attention, sharing a conversation no one else would ever hear. He didn't try to impress me. He didn't fill the silence with compliments or grand gestures. He just listened, really listened, as I spoke about my mother's quiet strength, about the nights she stayed up sewing that dress by hand, about how I never quite felt like I belonged anywhere after she was gone. He shared things too, not headlines or business accomplishments, but fragments of a childhood shaped by pressure, by duty, by the loneliness of being raised to lead instead of live. And in that dim corner of a glittering room, I saw him, not as a CEO, not as a symbol, but as someone who knew what it meant to feel like the only one holding onto something invisible while everyone else chased gold. "In another world," I murmured, half to myself, "you'd be someone I could meet at a bookstore or a park bench, and none of this would matter." He smiled at that, his gaze warm but weighted. "In another world," he echoed. I'd still noticed the girl in the navy dress first. My chest ached in a strange, quiet way. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was recognition, the kind that makes you wonder what version of you is being seen. A version you almost forgot existed. And though I knew that the world we lived in wasn't kind to moments like this, I allowed myself one thing: hope. Fragile, fleeting, but mine. The next morning, reality returned without warning. My inbox overflowed with unread messages, and the office buzzed louder than usual. Low murmurs that stopped whenever I passed by. I didn't need to hear the words to understand the tone. People had seen us talking. People had noticed. And in a world like ours, silence was rarely innocent. Whispers travel faster than facts. I sat at my desk, trying to focus on quarterly reports, but my mind was still on the navy dress folded carefully in a garment bag at home, and on the things that were said under chandeliers the night before. The CEO, no, he hadn't contacted me. No follow-up. No email. No subtle message like the ones he sent before big meetings. Just absence. And maybe that was the answer. Maybe last night had existed in a world that dissolved when the lights came on. I told myself I was fine with that I was grateful for what it was. But I wasn't. Not entirely. Because now I had seen a version of myself that wasn't small. I had tasted the power of being heard, and it made returning to invisibility feel heavier than before. Around midday, I received a meeting invite one-on-one. His office. 15 minutes. No context. My fingers hovered over the mouse before I accepted. As I walked to the elevator, my heart pounded with a mix of dread and something almost like longing. Maybe it was foolish to hope. Maybe I was stepping into a room where things would be made clear and quietly erased. But some part of me needed to know whether last night had been real or just a beautiful illusion built on borrowed light. His office was quiet when I entered, too quiet like a stage before a monologue. He stood near the window, hands in his pockets, staring out the skyline as if the answers were hidden somewhere in the city lights. "You came," he said without turning. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "You asked." He turned then, slowly, and for a moment his face wasn't the composed CEO everyone else saw. It was something more uncertain. "Last night," he began, "wasn't planned. I didn't mean to make you a target." I blinked. "You didn't. You made me feel seen." He exhaled, like the words unsettled him. "That's the problem," he said quietly. "You were never supposed to be in the line of fire, but now there are eyes. People who interpret things." His voice trailed off, and I understood. This wasn't about what happened. It was about what it looked like. About what people would say. I crossed my arms, more to hold myself together than anything else. "Are you asking me to disappear?" He flinched at that. "No, I'm asking you to be careful." Silence settled between us like glass. Breakable. Reflective. "I don't belong in your world," I said, not bitter, just honest. He stepped closer, something unreadable in his eyes. Then maybe I need to question the world I've let myself belong to. My breath caught, because even if nothing changed after this, even if we returned to silence and schedules and distance, at least now I knew. I wasn't the only one who felt it. The shift, the fracture, the possibility. He moved to his desk and sat down, posture straighter now, the moment slipping back into formality like a coat he had to wear. I remained standing, unsure if I should sit or leave. "I won't insult you by pretending this is simple," he said, fingers tracing the edge of a closed folder. "But I wanted you to hear it from me. That last night wasn't a mistake." I sat then, slowly, placing my hands in my lap to steady them. "It didn't feel like one," I whispered. We stayed like that, across from each other with too much space and too little time, caught in that quiet pull between possibility and consequence. Outside the office, the world continued. Calls being made, promotions discussed, reputations shaped behind frosted glass. But in here it felt still. Sacred even. "I don't know what comes next," he admitted, his voice lower now. "But I'm not ready to pretend nothing happened." Neither was I. He stood again, walked to a small cabinet in the corner, and returned with a carefully folded square of fabric. "This was hers," he said, holding out a pale silk handkerchief embroidered with delicate navy flowers. "My mother's. She always carried it to board meetings. Said it reminded her to lead with softness." I took it with trembling fingers. No words, just gratitude, too big for language. He didn't ask me to stay, but he didn't ask me to leave either. As I stepped out of his office, the fabric clutched tightly in my hand. I knew something had changed. Not everything, but enough to keep walking forward. With eyes open and heart awake, the following days unfolded with a strange clarity. Nothing dramatic happened, no confessions in stairwells, no sudden changes in status. But something inside me was different. I walked through the office, no longer trying to disappear. I spoke when I had something to say, not when I thought it was safe. The stares didn't stop completely, but they began to lose their sharpness. The dress stayed at home now, carefully cleaned and stored, but its memory remained like armor beneath my skin. It wasn't about him, not entirely. It was about who I had remembered myself to be. I stopped waiting for his messages. I didn't avoid them either. When we passed in the hallway, there were quiet nods. When we sat in meetings, he listened like always, but now with an extra layer of knowing in his gaze. It was enough. More than enough. One afternoon, I found myself in the elevator alone. Just as the doors were about to close, he slipped in. We didn't speak, but he handed me a small folded note, nothing written on the outside. I waited until I reached my floor to open it. Inside, in clean, elegant handwriting, it said, "You didn't just wear her dress. You honored her voice. And yours." I stood there for a long time, the paper trembling in my hand, not from fear, but from the quiet truth of it. He hadn't saved me. I had saved myself. But he had seen it, and sometimes being seen, truly seen, is its own kind of miracle. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my hair in silence. No gala dress, no makeup, just me in a faded cotton shirt and soft light from the hallway. I thought about how strange it was that a single evening, a single sentence spoken across a crowded room, could rearrange so much inside me. That's my late mother's favorite. It wasn't just a defense. It was a bridge between two women who had never met, between two lives that might have stayed parallel forever. I picked up the silk handkerchief he'd given me and traced the navy embroidery with my fingertip. It didn't feel like something borrowed. It felt returned, restored. I didn't know what would happen next. Maybe we'd drift apart, back into the boundaries of our roles, CEO and employee. Maybe we'd never share another rooftop or moment of truth. But even if that was the case, this chapter had already left a mark too deep to erase. I placed the handkerchief beside the dress in my closet, letting them rest together. My mother would have smiled at that. She would have said, "Don't chase belonging. Carry it." And I finally understood what she meant. I didn't need to be accepted into someone else's world. I had one of my own. One that could make space for others, but never shrink for them. As I turned off the light, a thought settled softly in my chest. This wasn't the end. Not of the story. Not of me. Just the beginning of the version I hadn't dared to become, until now. The next time I wore the dress, it wasn't for a gala or a moment of defense. It was for me. I chose it on a quiet Sunday morning, slipping it on slowly, almost reverently, like a memory I wanted to feel close to. There was no one to impress. No spotlight. Just sunlight through the window, a book waiting on the table, and a warm cup of tea in my hand. But still it meant something. As I walked through the park later that day, a breeze caught the hem of the fabric, and for a moment I felt like I was floating between past and future. Not stuck in either, just moving forward. Someone stopped me briefly, a woman I'd never met, to say, "That dress is beautiful. It looks like it has a story." I smiled. "It does," I said, "but I'm still writing the ending." She nodded and walked away, unaware that her simple comment had stitched something whole inside me. I didn't need applause. I didn't need a rooftop confession or a headline romance. I had reclaimed my voice, thread by thread, and whether or not he ever stood beside me again, I knew I would no longer stand small. I was no longer the girl they laughed at. I was the woman who stayed, who listened, who answered back, not with anger, but with presence. And somewhere in the corners of this city, or the folds of time, if our paths crossed again, I would still be wearing her courage, not as a costume, but as skin,